Hi, everyone. Welcome to our office hour today. It's been a while, so welcome to everyone. So today we are. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our office hour today. Sorry about that. So today we're just going to cover. We're going to cover the solution for last week's task, and then we would then go through we'll go through some of the topics for this week. Okay, so let me just go get the let me go copy the task and paste it on that pad. I cannot find my, oops. Sorry, there's something going on and okay, I think I figured it out. Okay. All right, so we can go on. Let me just paste that in. Okay. All right, so this is the task for last week. I saw a question that was passed in. Well, I wouldn't say it was a question per se, but someone mentioned that the materials that are shared weekly are they are the complete opposites of the tasks that are given. And I think to a great extent, I disagree with that, because if we're using the first task as an example, the task for week 2, that was the task that covered loops and control flow. The task required you to use a loop, and in order to display the string, to display the number 30 when the count is 30, you are simply expected to use control flow, an if statement, or whichever you saw fitting to solve the task. And then for week 3, the task was on functions, which I feel you also received quite the materials, and we had sessions that covered functions that should have helped you to successfully carry out the task. But anyway, let's just solve the task, and then we'll move on from there. Okay, so it says using different functions and arguments, build a console calculator that performs the following operations on two numbers: addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, and modulus. All functions must be called in the main method inside the individual print statements and should return a num data type. Like I told you all last week when I did the solution for the week 2 task, before you get started, it's always great to break down the task so that you know what is expected of you. So first off, it says that all functions must have 2 arguments. Then it says you're supposed to carry out 5 operations, which are all this here. So we have to-dos. So these are the to-dos right here. And then, so this is the first requirement. This is the second requirement. Then the third requirement is that you should call all functions. Call all functions in the main method. And then all functions must return a data type. Not just any data type, must return a num data type. So yeah, this is the third requirement, this is the fourth requirement. Now, going by this, I know that before I get started, before I do 2, 3, and 4, I would first off create functions. Say, let's just be simple, right? So, okay, let's just, yeah. First requirement set all functions must have 2 arguments. So let's give it num1 and num2, right? Oops. We have this, I just placed it 4 times, 5 times actually. Then we rename the functions. Very simply, right? Very simply. So this already satisfies the first requirement that all functions, which is you're supposed to create a function for each of these operations, and all of them must have 2 arguments, just like we have here. Just as we have here. That's one. Then the next instruction says that, to-dos is to add, subtract, divide, multiply, and then use the modulus. The third function, okay, before we go to third and fourth, so we're expecting that, we already had that, sorry. We're expecting that since this says that we are to add, right? Let's just go straight to the point and do num1 plus num2. So this returns the addition of the 2 numbers that are passed in as arguments. Then we have for subtraction, let's say num2 minus num1. Oops. Then we have for division, let's just do num2 divided by num1. Multiplication, num1 multiplied by num2. Then modulo num2, num2, where's the sign? Num1. This has satisfied the next requirement, which is for addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, and modules. Now, the third one is all functions should be called in the main method. So I'm expected to do this addition. Let's just quickly copy over. You see here that we're getting the errors that each of these functions have two positional arguments, but we haven't passed in any of them. So let's correct that. So here we just want to pass random numbers just to satisfy that okay, so yeah, it did say that all functions must be called in the main method inside individual print statements. So this could have been done in two ways. It's either this could have been done in two ways, right? It's either you place this operation inside of a print statement so that whenever you call the function, it's going to print the addition, or you call the function inside of a print statement like so. But the problem with this is we're still going to solve the problem, but right now why it's showing an error is because we have assigned we've declared this function as void, and whenever you declare a function as void, it's expected to not return a value. So even if here I'm returning an addition, subtraction, or whatnot of all the arguments passed into the function, it's still not going to return anything because this function has been declared as void. But if I were to remove the void keyword, for example, we wouldn't have that error anymore. All right. So we're going to fix error in a bit when we satisfy the requirements for 4. So it says all functions must return a num data type. Num data types, we have double, int. These are num data types. So when we have for the addition, for example, I'm expecting that what is returned should be an integer, because here I'm passing in integers as parameters. But if I was to change this to a double, for example, this would fail because now whatever is returned here, when you add a double and an int, it's going to return a double, right? So this wouldn't fly. But if I were to change the data type that is returned to a double, then this would be fine. But let's just use an int in this case. The same applies here for subtraction. We'll just use an int. For division, because it's possible that when you divide two numbers, what you might return, you might get a double when you remember doubles are numbers with decimal points. So it's possible that when you divide two numbers, you can get a double. So just so that our code doesn't potentially break, we can just return a double for division, and for multiplication, we can also return an int or a double to be safe. In modulo, we can return oh yeah, we passed in it. Okay, let's just use an int. Then for modulo, we can also return an int. So like this, we're just going to place each of these functions inside a print statement so that we can get the value. The whole point of this is to make it easier for grading. I mean, if you don't put them in a print statement and I don't see what's going on, it means I'll have to, it's just easier for grading. Like the whole essence of putting it in a print statement is just so that grading can be easier. So it's for my own purpose. And thank you to those who did. So when we run this code now, we should see all of our values in the console. Yeah, exactly. So we have, oh, okay, let me, but yeah, it's pretty much correct. Division between modulo, between these numbers and whatnot. I passed in a larger value to num1 and a smaller value to num2, hence why the division is returning this. Remember, we're dividing the num2 by the we're dividing the num2 by num1 according to what we have going on in the code. The subtraction is the same. I passed in a bigger value to the first arguments, and we're subtracting num2 by num1. And then addition 2 is the same thing. So this is pretty much all that was required for this task. It was just to test your knowledge on functions, test your knowledge on the different operators that we have in that. And I strongly believe that all the materials that were uploaded for last week would have been enough to get this task done. But all the same, this is just a very simple solution. I expect that, I don't know, yeah, you're free to handle this whichever way that you want. You could have used named arguments. You could have used optional positioned arguments. You could have used whichever type of arguments that would have, that was okay with you, right? So this is not like the only solution that's that would pass. This is just an example of what was expected of you for this particular for last week's task, right? Okay, so that's it for this. Let's start out with what we have for today, which is on object-oriented programming. Before I go, let me just check the comment section and be sure that we're together. Okay, so on to today's topic, which is on object-oriented programming. So we're going to cover the following things. We're going to cover OOP, we're going to cover classes, we're going to cover constructors, and then if we have time, we'll cover private objects. Okay. So first off, let's start out with OOP. Let me clear this. Let's start out with OOP. OOP simply means object-oriented programming. And just as it says, it's pretty much the way in which we model our code or organize our code or architecture using objects, right? It's just the primary use of objects in our code, and examples of objects. We have classes, we have variables, pretty much anything that can contain data. pretty much anything that can contain data is an object. Anything that can contain logic is an object. So this is the center of object-oriented programming. If you don't have objects, then it means that, or if a programming language isn't object-oriented, it means you just have your methods or your code logic, just hanging around in different files or same files within your code base. But with object-oriented programming, you can organize your code into different objects. It's a lot cleaner, and it's what's the word? It's just a more organized way of writing your code. It has a ton of advantages that we can talk about in future sessions if it comes up. Okay, then we have, this is like a very short example, short description of what OOP is about. Then we have classes, right? Classes, in very simple terms, I know with the resources shared, or if you have done your research on your own, you would have seen that a class is most times referred to as a blueprint. So you have a class that contains appropriate properties or methods within it that sort of defines what that class is about. What am I talking about? So say, for example, you declare a class called human. Ideally, inside of your class, what we should see based on the name of your class, because it's just like when you're declaring a variable, you need to somewhat give it a value that properly matches the name that you're assigning to your variable, or like your function should have a name that is appropriate for what it's intended to do. Same thing with a class. A class should have properties or methods that are in line with what the class is supposed to accomplish, what the class is supposed to do. So it's just in the case where I do not have a class, it means I would just come here and define maybe different say place of birth, or oops. We could also have strings of date of birth. We could have ints of age. You just have them lying around and it's not associated with anything. But to make our code a lot more cleaner and make our variables, make the accessibility of our variables or properties a lot, well, okay, I already said easier, but this just organizes our code in a better way. Instead of just having our variables or methods or our functions just hanging around in our code, we get to group them, organize them using classes, right? So these here, we're going to go into what the error is saying in a bit, but this here, we are pretty much saying a human, for example, should have a name, should have a place of birth, should have a date of birth, should have an age, right? These are just sample properties of a human. So inside of a class, variables are referred to as properties, and inside of a class, functions are referred to as methods, right? Yeah, so our error, we should have seen this before in previous classes where it says, where it talks about nullability. So this is just simply saying that we cannot declare a variable without initializing it. So to fix this problem, it's either you initialize it, like you give it a value, or you make the variable or the property, in this case, nullable. This is pretty much just informing our compiler that it's okay for this variable to have a null value. It's okay, just don't shout at us, allow it to pass. Let this variable be null. right? That's the whole essence of this question mark right after our data type. So let's just do that for each of them. Now, if I were to, I can't access the properties inside of a class by simply just calling the variable. It doesn't work that way. It's not possible to access a class, a property of a class like this. You can see here that it doesn't even recognize what we're doing, like it's undefined because it's way in here. But if I were to do But if I were to do this, then it passed. What we're simply doing here is we're calling an instance of the class. This class, a class can have multiple instances. That is, you can call them anyhow you like. They're reusable. That's also another advantage of grouping your code or organizing your code into classes. Classes are reusable. Instead of having to declare these variables in different files within our code base or in different places, just have them hanging around, having multiple instances of them. I can just group them in a class and then call that class at any point that I want to use the values or I want to use those variables or those properties, right? So this is one way in which we can get the value or assign, in fact, a value to a property inside of a class. Another way is to create an instance. Is to create an instance of our class, like so. Right? And then we can also just access its properties simply like this. So this is simply saying, give us the value of the name property of this class instance of human, right? I could have, I could also create another instance and name it second human. And I could keep going on and on like that. And I can assign different values to each of the properties within the class. If you remember when we were talking about variables, declaring variables and assigning different values to them, you would remember that when we declared a variable, say name, and we assigned it a value, we can come down here and reassign it and give it another value. But we cannot create yet another variable with we cannot create another variable with this name because it's already defined. But with a class, we can create different instances of a class and use those properties as many times as we want to. And each of the instance that we create would have its own unique value that was assigned to it. If I assign Abbie to the property name of first human, it's not going to affect the property name of this other instance of human. Let's test it out, right? We're going to test all these out. I just had to ensure that we got all this very clearly. So we can, let's clean that up. We can, for now, just assign value to the name property of first human. And if I were to print this, I get to see Abbie in the console because that's what we assigned to it, right? But if I were to print second human, print the name of second human, I should get null because we have not assigned any value to the name property of this other instance of human. All we did was to assign a value to the name property of this instance and not this one. So you see that it's no matter what we do with this instance, it's not going to affect the second one, even though they are the same class, right? So that's what we mean by a blueprint. You know, you can have a ton of properties or methods, and then you can reuse them as much as you want to. You can use them in any way, in any fashion that you deem fit within your code base. So if I come here and I call second human, and then give it a value of she. So I print like so, print first human. So if I print them both, they would each have their different values that were assigned to each of them, right? So this is pretty much, this is a basic explanation of what a class is about, right? Now, you see here that when we assigned a value, we first off created an instance of the class, and then we just called the property, and then we assigned a value to it, and it works just fine. Another way in which we can make this work, another way in which we can assign a value to, we can assign a value to a class is by using constructors, right? A constructor is, if you have gone through the materials or you had made research on your own, you would have seen that a constructor is quite similar to a function, right? Okay, before we move on to constructors, let me go to the comment section and be sure that we're together. Okay, I'm seeing some questions that I'm not sure are clear to me just yet. So if you can, please rephrase so that I'll be sure that I'll be able to answer your question when I do check the comment section next. Okay, so back to this, right? A constructor is somewhat a function that we use to pass in the different properties of a class, and then we get to initialize them or assign values to them at any point in our code base, right? So creating a constructor, you first of all give it the name of the class. You declare a constructor within a class, not outside of it. So you call the name of the class followed by parentheses and then a semicolon, right? So this is a basic constructor. Just as we covered with functions, you can pass in the properties within a function using curly brackets or using square brackets or using pretty much all the different kind of arguments that exist in that. So we can just pass in our, we can just pass in we can just pass in our properties. Sorry, give me a second. All right, sorry about that. So yeah, just as we have for functions, okay, I already explained that. Just as we declare a function that we can pass in as many arguments as we want, we can also do that with constructors of classes, right? So to assign the instance of each of these properties declared in the class, to assign this instance to our constructor, we get to use this keyword. So you see here that we already have we already have the suggestions of what we can possibly pass in as a constructor inside of this yeah, we already have options. We already have suggestions of the parameters we can pass into the constructor. So we have the age, date of birth, name, place of birth, just as we have them here. So that's like what this keyword is. It's the instance of each of the properties that we have inside of this class. So we have, let's just call them all. So this, you cannot obviously call a property twice inside of a constructor. They all have one, you call them once, right? Okay, so we can also achieve the same thing by using curly brackets, right? This is still appropriate for declaring a constructor, right? So with what we've done here, if we had not added the curly brackets, you would see that our two instances of the human class are now throwing errors, just as we have for functions, or just as we have for functions that are declared with the positional arguments. You're expected to, it's compulsory, it's mandatory for you to assign values to them whenever you create a new instance of a class, or in the case of a function, the same thing. So that's why I said the constructor is very, very similar to functions. So yeah. So we're going to pass in the different values. I would prefer to make this optional so that we're not forced to assign values to each of these variables every time. Okay. So here, because when we use a curly bracket, we're pretty much saying that the arguments inside of this constructor are named. So for us to assign a value, we need to call the name of the argument, and then we assign a value to it. Yeah, I think that's fine. Then we can decide to just give the second, we can decide to just give the second instance value of Sheyi, just the value, assign a value to the name argument like we did here. So if we're to print this, okay, let's give it a different name just so that you can see the clear difference in the console. I can't think of any name right now. Okay, so let's do David. Okay, this is just an example. So if we run the code now, we should see each of the variables, each of the values that we assigned to the parameters, right? So for first human, the name we gave it is David. For second human, the name we gave it is Dio, and that's exactly what we're seeing here in the console. So instead of having to call this instance, then call the property and assign a value, we can just do this directly inside of our class like so, and then use it in other parts of the code as we see appropriate, right? Yeah, so this is pretty much the basics of classes, assigning values, using constructors, and accessing the values or the properties of each of our class. I'm here in the comment section to see if we're together. Bolotife, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. You said those properties are compulsory for human. How then do we make sure that it is non-nullable? I'm sorry. It's the question isn't clear in my head right now. So could you please rephrase, please? Thank you. How do we create properties specific to an instance? So just as we have inside of the class, all the different properties that we have declared in it, like the name, the place of birth, date of birth, age, they're all specific to the human class. If I were to create another class, I would need to give it its own properties where required. It would not just like each property or each property of a class is specific to that class. It's specific to that class, yeah. In Python, properties / attributes created in the global scope are shared among all instances. Is it the same with that? I think we already just covered that whatever you whatever property you declare inside of a class is accessible at any point that you create an instance of that class. So wherever you create an instance of the class, you can access its properties or methods and whatnot that can be found within the class. I hope that answers your question. Okay. I just saw your question. The question that you said you left using the form, and I think we'll cover that in the next session, because today we're just simply supposed to cover the basics of OOP, classes, constructors. I would answer this question in the next office hour, because you asked about getters and setters, so I'm just going to cover this in the next office hour. Okay, so finally, we have a little bit more time. We're just going to talk about private objects. So it's pretty, it would have been clearer to explain this if we had access to different files in that pad, but we don't. So, but anyway, you declare a private object simply by adding an underscore when you, sorry, it's going to break because we just changed the name of the class. So every instance of it is going to break. We just fix that by adding an underscore to all of them. So like this now, if we were to have different files, within, if we were to have different files in our code base, if this class was declared in maybe file 1, we would not be able to access this class in file 2 because the underscore automatically makes this class private, meaning it can only be accessed inside of the file in which it is declared. Only inside of the file in which it's declared, right? So it wouldn't be, we would not exactly be able to experiment for classes, but we can do that for, methods, say, addition, num1, num2, and num1 plus Number 2. So we have this here without the underscore. I can come here and call first human. Okay, let's make this appropriate for calculate EOB. So you have yeah, int present year. So we just want to do present year minus. Okay, let's just do, let's not make things confusing. So let's just do age and do present year minus age. Okay. All right. So like this now, we can easily access the method inside of the class by calling the instance. We have calculate D of B right here, and then we just pass in the different values that's expected. And when we run our code, we should see the subtraction in the console. So whoever this human is, the human was born in 1982. But if I were to replace this with an underscore, I don't think, let me see. Still accessible. That's weird. Oh, we're in the same, oh, okay. But yeah, this is really not going to, it's not going to properly explain it because we're pretty much working from the same file. So yeah, if we had different files, we would have been able to properly display this, but ideally when you when a class or whatnot is declared using an underscore from another file, you would not be able to access that class or the content inside of it because it's going to be limited to that file alone. You can only use the properties, you can only access the properties or the classes within that file alone. So you could just test it inside of your IDE, just play around with it. But right now, since we're limited to that part, we will not exactly be able to properly, show it in action. Right. So I hope we're able to cover the fundamentals. Well, I wouldn't say the fundamentals, but pretty much the basics of OOP and classes, as well as its constructors, and all that's inside of it, right? The task for week 4 says to where is I opened it somewhere, but I can't find it now. I cannot find the window. Oh. Okay, I can't find the window. I opened the task. I was going to just run through it, but now I can't find. Okay, I see it. All right, so the task is pretty much expected to test your knowledge on classes, on properties, on methods, pretty much most things that are accessible to you within a class. It's also going to test your knowledge on if on control flow, that's your if else statement and your switch case, whichever one you would want to use for this assessment. It's going to test your knowledge on control flow. It's going to test your knowledge on classes. It's going to test your knowledge on constructors. It's going to test your knowledge on properties and methods, right? Like I said, properties, within a class, variables are known as properties, and within a class, functions are known as methods. So that's just a different term, but it's pretty much the same thing. It's just the use case that's changed the name. Also, just like the task for week 3, you're not expected to use anything fancy. When it says that it's supposed to accept user inputs, it just means that I should be able to pass in values to your methods. For example, I should be able to easily pass in a value to it. When you want to pass in a value, when you want to pass a value to a method or to a function, all you need to do is declare that function with arguments, right? A way that I can pass in value, a way that you can pass in value. That's all that's required. It's not telling you to use. I saw people saying things about using .io. No, that's not necessary, please. You're just supposed to declare methods or functions that accept values that are declared using arguments, using parameters. That's all that's required, really. All right. So that's it for today. I hope that those who were slightly confused about classes and all that it entails are have been, I hope it's a lot clearer, and you'd be able to carry on with the task now if you've not been able to get started. If you have questions, our next office hour is on Friday. So if you have any question that you want answered, any specific question, please leave it using the form and I would answer them in our next class. Okay. So thank you all for joining. I would see you all on Friday.